a chilling display of excessive force, a SWAT team stormed a quiet suburban home, tasing a black veteran's wife right in front of him as their children screamed in fear. The veteran, frozen for a moment, rose slowly and uttered 5 words that made the entire SWAT team halt in stunned silence. Those words carried not just the weight of his military service, but the fury of a man pushed to his limit. What happened next shocked the entire neighborhood and sparked a viral storm across the country. This isn't just a story. It's a national wake-up call. The moment was charged with chaos. A SWAT team had just burst into the home of a black military veteran, guns drawn and adrenaline high. The team was acting on what would later be revealed as faulty intelligence. In the blink of an eye, the veteran's wife was tased in front of him. She screamed and collapsed to the floor, convulsing, as their children looked on in horror. The veteran, still in disbelief, stood frozen, not with fear, but with rage and heartbreak. And then he spoke. The words that came from his mouth were not threats, not profanity, not panic. Instead, they were calm, deliberate, and loaded with moral authority. He said, "I fought for this country too." 5 words. But in the context of the moment, those words hit harder than any weapon. They reminded the SWAT team that the man they had just traumatized was not a criminal or a threat. He was a decorated veteran, someone who had once risked his life in defense of the very freedoms they claimed to protect. Those 5 words forced the officers to see beyond their biases. Suddenly, the image they had of a dangerous suspect began to crack. The man in front of them wasn't some faceless target. He was one of their own. He had worn a uniform, taken an oath, and served the nation honorably. The SWAT team, trained to follow orders and neutralize threats, was momentarily disarmed, not by a weapon, but by truth and identity. It was a jarring contradiction. The man they were treating as a threat had once stood on the same side as them, committed to justice and service. This moment highlights how powerful identity and voice can be in situations where systems fail to recognize humanity. The veteran's words pierced the bubble of aggressive policing, exposing its flaws. Law enforcement officers, often conditioned to view certain communities, especially black communities, through a lens of suspicion and danger, were forced to confront the reality that their assumptions had led them to assault an innocent woman and traumatize a family. The man's simple statement carried the weight of his service, the injustice of the moment, and the pain of countless others who have suffered from similar abuses. What made the statement even more impactful was the tone. The veteran didn't shout. He didn't resist. He stood his ground with dignity, letting the truth of his experience speak for itself. That composure, rooted in training and experience, held a mirror up to the officers and made them question their actions. For a brief moment, it turned the raid into a reckoning. Several officers reportedly hesitated, lowered their weapons slightly, and exchanged uneasy glances. The room was silent, filled with the sound of the veteran's children crying and his wife's labored breaths. The weight of the mistake became clear to everyone present. This turning point also underscores how deeply racial bias influences police behavior. Would the raid have played out the same way if the veteran were white? Would his wife have been tased without warning? These questions began to surface immediately after the incident went public. But in that moment, those 5 words served as a humanizing force. They reminded the officers that their target was a husband, a father, and a fellow servant of the nation. It forced them to pause and reflect, something rarely seen in high-intensity raids. The veteran's statement has since resonated across the country, going viral and becoming a rallying cry for reform. Activists, veterans groups, and civil rights leaders have pointed to it as a perfect example of how dignity and truth can disrupt violence. His words have become symbolic of the broader struggle for recognition and justice in policing. They challenge law enforcement and the public alike to rethink how we treat people based on race, appearance, or neighborhood. In hindsight, the power of the veterans' words lies not just in their truth, but in their ability to cut through the noise, the shouts, the commands, the chaos, and demand recognition. He didn't need to say much. He simply reminded the officers that he was human, and that he had served the very flag sewn onto their uniforms. It forced them to face the contradiction between their training and their actions. Ultimately, this moment served as a powerful reminder. Language, when rooted in truth and identity, can be more disarming than any weapon. It forced the SWAT team to reconsider their role, their assumptions, and their humanity. And perhaps most importantly, it gave the world a rare glimpse of hope. That even in moments of injustice, clarity and courage can still change the course of events. What began as a terrifying ordeal inside the home of a black veteran and his family quickly spiraled into a national controversy, and ultimately forced the local police department to face serious scrutiny. When a SWAT team mistakenly raided the veteran's home and tased his wife in front of their children, the resulting public outrage led to something rare: a full internal investigation into the department's use of force and racial profiling practices. The veteran, a decorated former soldier, was not a threat. He was a law-abiding citizen with no criminal history, living in a quiet neighborhood with his wife and children. Yet his family was treated like criminals, subjected to aggressive force, humiliation, and violence in their own home. The catalyst for the raid was reportedly suspicious activity in the area, but as it became clear in the aftermath, there was little to no credible evidence linking the family to any crime. The warrant did not name them, and there was no prior contact with law enforcement that would justify such an extreme response. Once the story hit social media and local news outlets, it went viral. Footage from a neighbor's security camera, along with eyewitness testimony and photos of the aftermath, painted a disturbing picture. Within hours, the community began asking hard questions. Why was a SWAT team deployed for what appeared to be a low-level investigation? Why was deadly force used so quickly, especially in a home where children were present? And most importantly, would the same level of force have been used if the family had been white? These questions were not ignored. Public protests, veteran advocacy groups, civil rights organizations, and local officials began demanding answers. The police department, facing mounting pressure, announced an official internal investigation within days. The investigation was tasked with reviewing not just the specific actions of the officers during the raid, but also the broader decision-making processes that led to the incident, including how intelligence was gathered, whether racial profiling influenced the operation, and whether protocol was followed. As the investigation unfolded, troubling details emerged. The information used to justify the raid had not been properly vetted. It had come from an anonymous tip about suspicious activity and had no direct link to the veteran's household. There had been no surveillance, no confirmation of illegal behavior, and no consultation with community liaisons or veteran affairs officers who might have provided insight into the family's background. Yet despite these gaps, a heavily armed SWAT unit was mobilized and entered with force. Even more disturbing was the department's lack of accountability procedures. Officers failed to identify themselves properly, used tasers without warning, and ignored pleas from the veteran to stop. These findings pointed to a systemic problem within the department, a culture of assuming threat based on race, combined with inadequate oversight and training. The officers involved were placed on administrative leave, and the department's leadership faced growing calls for resignation. The investigation also revealed that this was not an isolated incident. Internal audits showed a pattern of aggressive policing in black neighborhoods, even in areas with low crime rates. SWAT raids were disproportionately targeting black families, often with insufficient evidence and devastating consequences. This discovery added weight to the veteran's case and further justified the community's outrage. In response to the findings, several reforms were proposed. These included revising SWAT deployment protocols to ensure that such force is only used in high-risk situations with strong, confirmed evidence, mandatory bias and de-escalation training for all officers, focusing on how to interact respectfully with communities of color and with military veterans, creating an independent civilian oversight board to review all future use-of-force incidents and hold officers accountable, establishing a liaison unit specifically for handling issues involving veterans, to ensure their service and status are considered before action is taken. The impact of the investigation reached beyond the city limits. National media picked up the story, and lawmakers began citing it in conversations about federal police reform legislation. Veteran groups joined with civil rights leaders to push for stronger protections against racial profiling, especially for Black veterans who often face discrimination despite their service. The veteran himself became a reluctant symbol of this movement. While he never sought publicity, his composure during the raid and the moral weight of his statement, "I fought for this country too," gave the public a powerful, human lens through which to view the failings of the justice system. He later spoke at a city council meeting, calmly recounting the trauma his family endured and urging leaders to ensure no other family has to experience what his did. In the end, the internal investigation was not just about one tragic incident. It became a reckoning for a department, a community, and a country. It forced law enforcement to examine how bias, fear, and flawed systems can lead to devastating consequences. It showed that justice is not just about responding to crime, but about preventing harm, especially to those who have already given so much in service to the nation. The investigation is ongoing, but its legacy is already clear. It brought hidden injustices into the light, gave a voice to the voiceless, and proved that one family's trauma can lead to real, lasting change.